I'd like to welcome you to Section 2 of the Introduction to Autism. In this section, we're going to talk about one of the criteria for eligibility determination in Missouri to be served under an autism categorical label, and that criteria is disturbances of communication cognition. Disturbance of speech, language, and nonverbal communication is one of the mandated criteria required to identify a student as eligible to receive services under the categorical disability label of autism. Speech disorders, including articulation, voice, and fluency, are not usually the primary issues facing children with autism. Deficits in language skills seem to be the bigger issue. For example, although verbal, some students' language is really not functional for everyday purposes. The individual may perseveratively ask questions or echo what he or she hears. The student may not be able to use language purposefully, to ask questions, to comment, to gain information, or to ask for clarification or revision. Further, communication may not have communicative intent. Some vocalizations may occur randomly or for self-stimulation. With autism, we are usually not talking about just a delay in language, although that can certainly be part of the picture. We are also looking at disturbances in language. The student who can read video credits but doesn't comprehend what he's read might be an example. The 4-year-old who is just saying his very first word would be described as having delayed language. But when he immediately uses that first word in meaningful kernel sentences, that's a disturbance. In other words, immediate use of the first word in sentences is not the typical progression of language development. Another example might be the teenager who uses a large vocabulary of very formal language, but yet can't socialize and socially interact with his peers. Lack of social communication is often the most telling aspect of language for the student with autism. Use of typical greetings, topic maintenance, being able to interrupt, negotiate, and gain attention are struggles for many of individuals with ASD. Children with autism sometimes learn language in chunks rather than analytically. This is called Gestalt language learning. Rather than breaking language into smaller units of meaning or morphemes, the child memorizes whole chunks of language. For example, I might ask a child with autism the question, "What would you like for breakfast?" The child answers, "I want Wheaties, the breakfast of champions." I might ask the same question of a child without autism and get the response, "Me wants bowls of cereals." At face value, it may appear the child with autism has better language development. He or she sounds great. In fact, the latter child actually demonstrates the better language development. This child is learning to analyze language. Even though the child's statement is grammatically incorrect, he or she realizes that an S on the end of the word means more than one, and so on. Children with autism often don't do this, which compromises their language development, especially their receptive abilities. Some children are simply mute. They do not talk. This is rare. Most individuals with autism will verbalize some, even if the verbalizations are not functional. The concern is not so much lack of speech as lack of functional speech. Many students will need support to communicate. This support often includes augmentative and alternative communication, or AAC. AAC takes many forms and can include the use of sign language, pictures, a single message voice output device, a high-tech type of device, or the Picture Exchange Communication System, or PECS. Echolalia. Let me get back to my notes. Echolalia is an unusual characteristic sometimes displayed by individuals with autism. In its simplest form, this is repeating what's heard. Echolalia can be immediate, delayed, or mitigated. Delayed echolalia would be something like the Wheaties example. Mitigated echolalia is a positive sign. It is echolalia that changes in the repeating. The change indicates the child is analyzing language to some degree. For many children with autism, echolalia is a start at language development. Although considered unusual or disordered, it provides a foundation for building language. Perseverative speech is persistent repetition of comments or questions which may be both communicative or non-communicative. Perseveration is used among children with autism for several reasons. It may be self-stimulating, or it may provide time for a child to process information. In the case of echolalia, the child may be affirming or checking what is said. But whatever the case, it is important to recognize these non-functional uses of language as a place to start. Organizing the environment, including our own responses, will assist in shaping these types of production into functional language. We tend to overestimate how much children with autism understand. Sometimes their speech sounds fine, so it is assumed they also have good receptive language. Remember, these children often learn language in a gestalt or chunked manner. Inability to analyze small but meaningful units of language, like ed or s endings, greatly impacts comprehension. Further, we also know of individuals with autism who are excellent readers. However, comprehension of what is read may be very poor. Use of visuals is key in supporting kids with autism. What is heard goes away, but what is shown remains and enhances the auditory input. Behavioral problems often have their basis in comprehension. I'm not going to follow instructions I don't understand. Sometimes individuals with autism struggle with processing what they hear. If my auditory processing is too slow, I'm left behind when multiple directions are given or when in a lecture situation. Sometimes comprehension occurs not because the child understands language, but because he or she has responded to something else in the environment, like a familiar routine. For example, the teacher says, "Get your hats, coats, homework, line up, be ready for the bus." The child complies because he sees other children doing the same thing. The child may also be responding to environmental cues. For example, a child might hear the refrigerator door open and know he can get something to drink. However, the parent may think the child understands her direction to come here and get some milk. Sometimes high-priority events signal to a child. For example, Mom says, "John, get your teeth brushed because it's time to go to bed." As she says this, she hands John the toothbrush and toothpaste. John doesn't understand the language, but he knows what to do with the toothbrush and the toothpaste. Other times, the child may be responding to specific elements of a verbalization. We can't go outside because it's raining. The child hears outside and reacts negatively because that's not what's happening. Social awareness is an area affected by decreased facility with language. Children with autism display impoverished strategies for understanding the communicative process. Aside from sentence structure or syntax and word meanings or semantics, there are also pragmatics. Pragmatic skills include the practical aspects of language, lack of back and forth exchange, showing interest, maintaining topics, and so on. While pragmatic skills are often subtle and can be difficult to test, they can have a huge impact on social communication if deficient. Let's discuss a few of these pragmatic skills. Initiating social exchange is an important skill for children with autism. The ability to initiate a communicative exchange is considered to be an important predictor of favorable outcomes among children with autism. A study published in the Journal of the Association for Persons with Severe Handicaps demonstrated favorable outcomes for children who were not passive communicators, but who could initiate social exchange. The study suggests that initiation may be a pivotal skill or a behavior that has widespread implications. This pragmatic skill should not be overlooked. Difficulty in responding in a reciprocal manner or use of social reciprocity is also an area of concern with children with autism. Very young infants demonstrate an understanding of this concept, such as in the game of peekaboo. A lack of social reciprocity affects the communicative partner by decreasing his or her exchanges, thus creating a vicious cycle of decreasing communication. Eye contact is another skill impacting communication. Although some children use peripheral vision and indirect eye contact, what we really want from them, for them is to show interest and attention. Even children who do not have terrific eye contact will at least check in once in a while. Many children with autism do not do this. Interpreting facial expression and body language is another area of focus. Interpretation of facial expression can be very difficult for children with autism. Deriving meaning from subtle changes in facial expression is difficult, and even when specifically taught, is not carried over well into the general environment. What is sometimes considered poor behavior is often grounded in misinterpretation of subtle facial cues. The same can be said for body language. Think about how much information we gain from facial expression and body language, and how our understanding of the world would be skewed if we could not interpret these important cues. Proximity, in terms of personal space, attention, and defining the importance of what's said, also has subtle social implications. Children with autism need to learn these cues. They don't just pick them up, as typically developing children do. Gestural language is often impaired in children on the autism spectrum. Although these children will gesture, their use of gestures for regulating others rather than for social communication is usually what happens. A young child might take his parents by the hand and direct them to the refrigerator, but not be able to wave by or point to objects of interest. Students with Asperger's syndrome and high-functioning autism have an especially difficult time with social skills. Because they often have excellent expressive language, large vocabularies, and adequate to above adequate academic skills, we expect they also have well-developed social skills. This is just not the case. These students are often very impaired by their social skill deficits. Aside from seeming odd, the lack of social skills impacts ability to live on their own, pursue employment, and have satisfying relationships. Social skill deficits may even lead to problems with the legal system. It is imperative those working with students with social skills needs understand and meet these needs. It's a quality of life issue. Sometimes these higher functioning students are thought not to qualify for special education services. Even though they may do well on standardized tests of language, careful observation will demonstrate the significant deficits common to this population. Remember, autism is behaviorally defined. Many individuals with high-functioning autism have a narrow focus of interest. Some children are absorbed by the weather or dinosaurs or transportation. Others are obsessed with a video game. These individuals wrongly assume the rest of us are as interested in these topics as they are and may dominate a conversation. While often sounding like they have very well-developed language, careful observation will demonstrate a decrease in understanding as language becomes more and more abstract. These high-functioning individuals may regurgitate all kinds of factual information, but be unable to separate fact from opinion or answer why questions. Inappropriate social remarks may range from just saying something strange to remarks that may be misinterpreted as a threat or sexual harassment. It is important to address this issue in social skills training. Understanding humor is also an abstract task. For example, the punchline of a joke may require knowledge of multi-meaning words. The horse lived in a stable environment. Or the punchline may be dependent on stress. For example, placing the light bulb on the radio tower was the highlight of his career. Political jokes, for example, may require one to understand the subtleties of a politician's statement or understand what wasn't said. High-functioning children may take literally what is heard. Therefore, understanding figurative language such as sarcasm, humor, and idiomatic expression are very difficult, and this impairs comprehension. Conversational skills are difficult for many reasons. An individual might not understand the turn-taking required. He or she might not be able to stay on topic or might not participate if the topic is not interesting to them. Lack of eye contact or moving too far into another's personal space may also be barriers to conversation. Because these students sometimes have what we call pedantic or little professor-like speech and may know many facts about a particular subject, they may sound like they are giving a lecture. They may not have other more normalized ways of engaging. Being taught what to say in certain situations and being able to retrieve that information for functional use are two different things. Research has shown generalization of social skills as poor, even when the skills have been previously taught. We all give many messages through nonverbal means. The cocked eyebrow, demonstrating we are questioning what is said, the surprised look, or the teacher's evil eye may not have meaning to the child with autism. We interpret responses as behavior problems when in fact the student simply did not understand. We use a great deal of figurative language in our daily conversations. Imagine the anxiety level of someone who is unable to interpret this type of production. We previously mentioned a study completed by Lynn and Bob Cagle at the University of California at Santa Barbara. And let me get back to that note. They observed a group of children over time, and eventually these children divided themselves into two groups, one with good outcomes and one with poor outcomes. The Kegels had video of these children and were able to determine the variable distinguishing these two groups, and that variable was the ability to initiate language. The passive communicators had less positive outcomes. Have you ever acted like you were interested in what a friend had to say, but in reality you were bored? You probably valued your friendship and feigned interest. Many individuals with autism don't know how to do this. Chit-chat and small talk don't make much sense either. What we interpret as rude may be in reality just a skills issue. Have you ever wanted to say exactly what you were thinking but were too polite to do so? This skill may be too difficult for a person with autism. In fact, some adults with autism have complained they don't understand why people don't just say what they mean. That may be a lesson for those of us who are neurotypical. You don't talk to your boss in the same way as you address your 3-year-old. Most children don't talk to the principal in the same way they kid around with their friends. This again often eludes students with autism, getting them into trouble. Lack of social skills is probably the biggest roadblock to success for many of our students with autism. We're going to talk now about language production problems. Fluency and rate may be disturbed in some children with autism. They may sound like stuttering, so check carefully as there is a higher occurrence of dyspraxia in children with autism. Dyspraxia is a neurological disorder involving difficulty with motor planning for speech. A great resource for information about dyspraxia is apraxiakids.org, and that's in your notes. Voice quality can be gruff or hoarse, and intonation may be unusual. This varies widely among individuals, and not everyone will demonstrate these language production problems. Sometimes speech is rushed and explosive, or it may be slow and drawn out. Often we hear a monotonous quality with little inflection to indicate meaning. Other times, inflection may be unusual. Inappropriate pitch, too high or too low, may also be a problem. Syllable and word stress may be unusual. Again, you won't see all these difficulties in one person, but language production problems can call attention to the individual and may make him seem to be somewhat bizarre. Poor language production may keep a person from progressing to his or her full potential, and may require remediation directed by a speech-language pathologist. All of these difficulties will not appear in one person, but language production problems call attention to an individual and can cause him to seem different from others. Articulation errors, or speech sound errors, occur at about the same rate as in the typically developing population. The term language cognitive is hyphenated because it's difficult to consider one without the other. They are intertwined and dependent on each other. When we think about language cognitive problems in person with autism, we consider not just delayed issues, but also disturbed development. Development is uneven and unusual. Vocabulary may be advanced when compared to actual comprehension. There may be areas of significant strengths as well as significant weaknesses. Language may be unusual in its content or presentation. Language development may be out of order. Autism is a neurologically based disorder, and so we can expect some differences in the cognitive abilities of these individuals. Some of the things that are difficult for individuals with autism follow. Sometimes it's difficult to make typical associations between concepts. Associations may be idiosyncratic. Some of these individuals may see the whole rather than, or may not see the whole. They may just see details, and so they really don't get that big picture. Being able to get that big picture is called central coherence. They may struggle with planning, organizing, and prioritizing. They may comprehend auditory input very poorly and really need some visual support to help them comprehend. They may have difficulty with generalization or carryover of what they've learned. Some individuals with autism are contextually bound. They don't really apply what's learned in one context and move it on into another context. They have struggle taking another's perspective. They may have difficulty shifting attention. They often will utilize short-term memory and struggle with that, with the short-term, not remembering what was just said, what the directions just were, but they may have very strong rote and long-term memory. Some of these students will have difficulty applying knowledge and being able to problem solve. That's often a big difficulty for many of our students. They may have difficulty understanding abstraction. As things become more abstract and complex, comprehension decreases. And a lot of these students really, because of all the struggles they have, perform under conditions of anxiety, and when that anxiety increases, their performance skills decrease. Many behavior problems are the result of lack of communication skills. Individuals with autism often communicate to us through their behaviors. The student who has no way to tell us he is sick might hit the person who comes near him. The child who has been given seat work he perceives as too difficult and hasn't developed skills to ask questions may swipe the papers off his desk. The preschooler who wants to engage with the other children in his class but doesn't know how may pinch. Rather than providing a consequence for bad behavior, we need to determine the function or the why of the behavior and teach the child more appropriate ways to communicate his message. This many times involves provision of augmentative and alternative communication, also known as AAC. There are all kinds of AAC devices on the market, and many of these tools can be made easily. For example, all the child who is frustrated by his seat work may need is a 3x5 card with "I need help" written on it. He can display the card, get the assistance he needs, and avoid having to swipe his papers off the table. The preschooler who inappropriately engages with peers may need a simple device with a recorded message, "Play with me." Same function, more appropriate communication. Thinking about behavior as a communication skill points us in the direction of meaningful intervention. When considering challenging behavior, two key words important for you to define and understand are form and function. The form of a behavior is what the behavior looks like, or its topography. The form of the behavior may be hitting, biting, pushing items off a desk. If you ask a behavior specialist what you should do about these forms of behavior, she would have to tell you she doesn't know. A behavior support plan is tied to the function, not the form of the behavior. The why is more important than the what. Let's take biting as an example. If a child is biting because he is trying to get relief from a toothache, then the support plan would involve taking him to the dentist. If he's biting because he's trying to obtain sensory stimulation, the support plan would involve giving another more appropriate way to obtain the sensory input. If the function of the biting is communication-based, if he's trying to tell me something, maybe that he needs a break, the support plan will involve teaching him an appropriate way to communicate that need. This may be done either through AAC or through verbalization. The point is to teach the child it's okay to need a break and it's okay to say so. Functional Communication Training, or FCT, is a method for teaching appropriate ways to communicate. An excellent resource about FCT is the book Communication-Based Intervention for Problem Behavior, a user's guide for producing positive change, and this is by Edward Carr, C-A-R-R, and others. One form of behavior may have more than one function. Likewise, one function may have several forms. It is important to remember the function or functions of behavior will lead us to appropriate intervention. Review Resource 6 for an overview of functional assessment of behavior. This is the strategy that is a key for determining function. When we get into the